It was the week leading up to Christmas, a time when the winter air is thick with the scent of pine and the sound of festive cheer. Phil had entered the toy store with the kind of eager anticipation that only a father can feel. A father who envisions the spark of joy in his children's eyes as they unwrap their presents. He meticulously selected toys for his 7-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter, each chosen with love and the intimate knowledge of his children's whims and fancies. In a burst of holiday spirit, he had also arranged for a Santa Claus to make a surprise visit to their home on Christmas Eve, hoping to craft an unforgettable memory for his little ones. However, the clutches of old habits gripped tightly, and Phil found himself inexplicably drawn to the bar on his way home. Perhaps it was the weight of the holiday stress, or the yearning to briefly recapture a time when life's responsibilities seemed less heavy. Whatever the reason, it was a decision that would alter the course of the evening. Hours passed, marked by the rising laughter and clinking glasses. Phil's temporary escape from reality stretched long into the night until the bar's neon lights dimmed, nudging him to return home. With the Christmas gifts in hand, his heart heavy with a mix of guilt and inebriation, he stumbled into the quiet darkness of his house. He made his way to the kitchen with the exaggerated caution of the inebriated, clumsily attempting to navigate his home without disturbing the sleeping family. With a small sigh of relief, Phil gently closed the kitchen door behind him. He was convinced his nocturnal escapade had gone unnoticed. But as he flipped on the light, the dim illusion of his stealth was shattered. There, in the soft glow of the kitchen light, stood Gina, his wife. She was the epitome of fatigue and frustration, her arms folded in an unspoken reprimand, her eyes bleary yet burning with a familiar disappointment. "Phil?" Gina's voice broke the silence, laced with a tiredness that was more than physical. "What time do you call this?" Phil's words stumbled out of his mouth, tipping over his apology. "Gina, I didn't mean... Do you have any idea what time it is?" Gina interrupted, her words sharp but her voice shaking. "I had to tell the kids stories, convince them that Daddy got caught up with Santa's elves, working on a special toy just for them. Do you know how hard it is to keep spinning these tales, Phil?" Phil's shoulders slumped as he looked down at the bag of toys, now feeling more like a burden than a bundle of joy. "I know, Gina, I know. It's just..." He tried to find the words, the excuses that might soften the blow of his failings. "Work has been so tough, and I thought a quick drink would help, but..." "A quick drink?" Gina's eyes narrowed. "The children were waiting. I was waiting." Gina's arms slowly unraveled from their tight cross as she exhaled a deep, burdened sigh, shifting her weight from one foot to the other in a restless dance of unease. With a deft flick, her phone glided from her grip, landing with a muted thump before Phil. He looked at it, bemusement etching his features. "What's this?" he inquired. Her eyes narrowed and stormy bore into his. "How long has this been happening?" she demanded, her voice a tightrope of accusation and vulnerability. "Honey, what are you talking about?" Phil's voice was a mix of concern and bewilderment as he reached for the phone. The screen illuminated to reveal a stark, anonymous message that caught through the air like a cold blade. "Phil's having an affair." Astonishment washed over Phil's face, leaving him speechless. He wasn't caught in the act. His innocence was genuine, his confusion absolute. Yet there it was, a claim so incendiary it threatened to ignite their trust into flames. For Gina, this was a blow of seismic proportions, a shattering revelation she hadn't braced for. The start of the dissolution of Phil and Gina's marriage didn't fit the archetype of dramatic betrayals or clandestine affairs that often saturate the narrative of broken unions. Instead, it was a slow erosion, a casualty of Phil's increasing alcoholism. As Phil's restaurant business flourished, he found himself buoyed by the camaraderie of new friends, acquaintances who flocked to him like moths to a flame, drawn by the warmth of his success. What began as an occasional indulgence, whiskey savored once a week, then twice, insidiously wove itself into the fabric of Phil's daily life. During this time, Gina, preoccupied with the demands of nurturing their infant daughter, Emily, noticed little of her husband's descent. She perceived Phil's retreats to the study as a necessary dedication to his thriving business, not the refuge of a man evading the shrill soundtrack of his child's cries, which grated on his nerves like an off-key note. In Gina's upbringing, the presence of alcohol was as commonplace as salt on the dinner table. To her, drinking, even in excess, was woven into the tapestry of life's celebrations and sorrows. It did not ring alarm bells. Yet as the months slipped by, the veil of normalcy began to fray. The signs, once subtle, grew impossible to ignore. As the tides of fortune receded and the business faced a downturn, Phil's casual drinking morphed into a desperate clutch at control, an anchor as everything else seemed to drift away. The day Gina's phone lit up with the incriminating text message was the day her patience frayed to its breaking point. As Phil's explanations poured forth, each word seemed less like a plea of innocence and more like the desperate scrabbling of a man caught in a lie. His attempts at defense, clumsy and ill-conceived, only served to ensnare him further in the web of suspicion. She took the kids and left. In the stark silence that followed, Phil could hear the echo of his own thoughts, a cacophony of regrets and realizations. For the first time, the consequences of his actions stared back at him, unblinking and undeniable. The man who once took pride in his strength, his business, his family, recognized he had been rendered powerless by his own hand. As the realizations continued to pummel him, his gaze fell upon the little drawings stuck to the fridge door, crayon depictions of a happy family that seemed so foreign now. A visceral sorrow took hold, a grief for the time lost and the hurt caused. Within a week, he found himself retreating to the one place that still needed him, or so he thought, his restaurant. There, amid the familiar clatter and bustle, he sought refuge in the office that had become his makeshift bedroom. The restaurant, once the talk of the town, was now gasping for air in an increasingly competitive market. New, vibrant eateries had mushroomed in the neighborhood, their novelty and lure drawing in Phil's loyal clientele. The urgency to innovate and revamp his establishment was there, yet Phil's focus was fractured, splintered by the demands of his personal life spiraling out of control. During a particularly dark chapter, Phil vanished from his daily routine, his absence at work marking over a week's duration. His phone was switched off. It was within these still walls that he secluded himself, shrouded in solitude. It was Anna, a waitress from the restaurant, who pierced his self-imposed isolation. Her presence at his doorstep was as unexpected as it was welcome. Upon seeing Phil, she offered a warm greeting, her smile undiminished by the brackets that adorned her teeth. Contrary to the reactions Phil had grown accustomed to during his struggles with alcoholism, recoils of repulsion or masked disgust, Anna's demeanor held none. There was no wince, no turning away, just acceptance. That day, she became an oasis of patience, sitting with him, soaking in his words without judgment. Her own stories of the restaurant and its patrons, tinged with concern for Phil's well-being, were a gentle reminder of life continuing beyond his shuttered windows. Her visits became a lifeline, stretching across 2 weeks. Each day, Anna returned, her consistency a counterpoint to his chaos. It was through her persistent encouragement that Phil eventually found himself stepping beyond the threshold of his home, embracing the world anew. At one juncture, fueled by her unwavering belief in his capacity for joy, Anna suggested a venture into the wild, a trip to reignite the happiness he yearned for. The battle with alcohol showed signs of a turning tide. Phil was slowly, painfully clawing his way toward sobriety. During this period of fragile recovery, his friends, once distant satellites in his orbit, re-emerged, beckoning him toward an unexpected haven, a spa. It was in the soothing embrace of steam that the camaraderie of old friends that Phil found a semblance of peace. There, he unfurled the tales of his tumultuous life, revealing the raw wounds of his divorce. Michael, ever the bachelor, seemed to bask in his freedom. With a self-satisfied air, he regaled Phil with tales of his unencumbered lifestyle. "Look at me, man. It's been 2 years since Monica and I split. No fights, no scandals, just freedom. And don't I just look younger?" he boasted, his voice tinged with a mix of humor and indifference meant to lift Phil's spirits. Yet it was Ryan, the more reflective of the group, who offered a sobering perspective. "Mike, don't tout that path to Phil. He's a family man. And you?" He trailed off, prompting Mike to encourage the completion of the thought. Ryan, uncharacteristically candid, didn't hold back. "Sorry, Mike, but you probably don't even remember your wife's name with all the other distractions you keep around you." To that, Mike laughed, a loud, unburdened sound that seemed to acknowledge the truth in Ryan's words without a hint of regret. As they lounged, the conversation inevitably turned to Phil's future and the possibilities of new companionship. The advice offered was light-hearted, even flippant, more jest than earnest counsel. Phil listened, sifting through their words for grains of wisdom, but found little to grasp onto. Emerging from the spa, Mike proposed a visit to a bar, a return to old habits, a bookend to the evening with cold beers. But Phil, in a moment that marked a subtle but significant shift, declined. His refusal hung in the air, a silent testament to his resolve. For so long, he had been pliant to the whims of others, a reed bending in the winds of peer influence, but now he stood firm. It was an act of quiet defiance, a signal of change that did not go unnoticed. The stillness of the evening wrapped around Phil as he navigated the familiar path home, the events at the spa still vivid in his mind. The calm was subtly punctured by the vibration of his phone. It was Ryan, and the concern in his voice was palpable. "Hey, Phil, I really respect what you did back at the spa," Ryan began, his tone earnest. "Listen, I know those guys. They like to have their fun, but sometimes at the expense of others. I should have spoken up sooner." Phil listened, a mix of gratitude and surprise coloring his silence. It wasn't often that Ryan delved into such personal territories. "I didn't realize you'd been pulled so deeply into their orbit. Just know steering clear from that bunch could be the best thing for you," Ryan continued, and Phil could almost see him nodding solemnly over the phone. As they spoke, the conversation took a turn toward Phil's current situation, the restaurant that had once thrived under his care. "And hey, if you need a hand at the place, my cousin Rebecca's looking for work. She's sharp, hardworking, and I think she could be a great fit," Ryan offered. "Yeah, send her over tomorrow," he said, the idea of new blood at the restaurant sparking a flicker of the old entrepreneurial spirit within him. They said their goodbyes, and Phil found himself contemplating the day's events as he approached his door. It had been a long time since he had felt anything resembling optimism. That night, as he readied for bed, he made a choice that just a few months ago would have seemed impossible. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Phil decided against the numbing allure of alcohol before sleep. It was a quiet victory, a small step toward the man he once was and the man he hoped to be again. "Good morning, Phil. Ryan told me you might have some work for me," Rebecca said, her voice tinged with a hopeful inflection. Phil motioned for her to take a seat at one of the dining tables. As he sat across from her, he couldn't help but assess her, not just as a potential employee, but as a chapter of a story yet untold. He asked about her last employment, expecting to discuss her previous experience in the industry. Rebecca's reply was hesitant, her voice lower. "It's been a while, 7 years to be precise." Phil's brow furrowed, a mix of curiosity and concern in his eyes. "May I ask what you've been doing since then?" With a steadiness that surprised him, Rebecca met his gaze. "I've been in prison," she said simply, letting the weight of the confession hang between them. Phil's instincts kicked in, a trained skepticism from years in the business world, but as she elaborated, Phil's suspicions gave way to empathy. Rebecca spoke of a tale that was deeply personal, one of love and the desperation of a mother separated from her child. She told him, "I'm not the criminal type, Phil. My crime was trying to be with my daughter in a system that was manipulated against me." She explained that she could do anything at the moment, provided that her background did not bother Phil. With a quiet determination, she assumed her role as both janitor and dishwasher, embracing the work with a diligence that spoke volumes of her character. She was the first to arrive and the last to leave. The staff began to take note of her unwavering work ethic. Several weeks after Rebecca's hire, Phil fell back into old habits, his resolve crumbling under the weight of loneliness and stress. He invited his friends over for a night that quickly descended into excessive drinking and card playing. As the liquor flowed, so did the candor of their conversation, their words sharpening with each glass. During a particularly intense hand, the talk turned to the state of Phil's restaurant. "Look at you, Phil," one friend goaded. "I'd wager that even your dishwasher could run the place better than you right now." Phil's pride, already bruised from the challenges he was facing, reeled at the jab. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly as he retorted, "Speaking of which, she's more than just an excellent worker. She's recently been released from prison." There was a moment's pause as the group processed this new information. Then Mike, with a snort of disbelief, said, "What? You've hired an ex-con? That just shows how little you care about your place anymore." The remark cut through the haze of Phil's intoxication, bringing a moment of clarity that was sharp and unwelcome. "What do you mean, Mike?" Phil demanded, seeking clarity but dreading the answer. Mike, perhaps emboldened by the drink or simply careless, shot back, "I mean, you said it yourself. You hired an ex-convict, didn't you?" Phil's anger, a tempest that had been gathering force within him, broke free. "So what?" he retorted, his voice rising. "I don't care about her past. As long as she's doing her job well, I trust her." "That's exactly your problem, man. You don't know who to trust," Mike persisted, his words slicing through the tense air. "Your wife left you, remember? You used to say she'd never leave you." That was the last straw for Phil. With a roar of fury, he lunged at Mike, only to be restrained by the others. He struggled against their hold, a maelstrom of rage and hurt swirling inside him. The mention of his family, the insinuation that he was naive, stoked the fire within Phil that had been smoldering since the day Gina left. The confrontation ended as quickly as it began, with Phil's friends dispersing into the early morning light, leaving him to grapple with the echo of their words and the realization that his battle with himself was far from over. Phil's thoughts drifted to Mike's words. The word trust echoed in his mind. It wasn't just about whether others were trustworthy, but also about trusting himself, his judgment, his decisions. As dawn unfurled its light upon another bustling day, Phil arrived at the restaurant with a resolution that felt both liberating and terrifying. The establishment, once a symbol of his success, now stood as a constant reminder of his failures and battles. But today, he was poised to step away, to relinquish control in a bid to salvage the fragments of his life that still held some promise. Rebecca, who had found in the restaurant a sanctuary of routine and redemption, was busy at her usual tasks when Phil approached her. His expression was unreadable, a mix of determination and a vulnerability that she had never seen in him before. "Rebecca, could you step outside with me for a moment?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the tempest that was brewing within him. Puzzled, Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron and followed Phil out of the kitchen. She watched as he gestured to the various parts of the restaurant, detailing operations and tasks with a strange urgency. Rebecca's confusion mounted. She couldn't fathom the direction of this impromptu tour. Then, without a preamble, Phil dropped his bombshell. "I'm taking some time off. I need to step back for a bit, and I want you to run the place while I'm gone." Rebecca's eyes widened, her mouth parting slightly in disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" she stuttered, half expecting a punchline that never came. "Not at all," Phil affirmed. "You're in charge now." "How can you just hand over everything just like that?" Rebecca's voice was a mix of honor and concern. "I'm only a janitor and a dishwasher." "You said you were a quick learner, didn't you?" Phil challenged gently. "Here's your chance to prove it. And don't worry about your past. I trust you. Your background is not my business." Those words struck a chord deep within Rebecca, melting away the icy barriers of judgment and stigma that had encased her heart since her release from prison. To be seen, to be trusted, was a gift she hadn't known she yearned for. "Thank you, Phil," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't begin to imagine how I'll manage, but manage I will. Thank you for this trust. If you run into any trouble, the staff is well versed in the day-to-day. The waiters, the chef, they'll have your back," Phil assured her, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. Phil made his way through the restaurant, his steps uneven, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. His eyes, worn from sleepless nights and the acrid sting of alcohol, caught sight of Anna. As he approached her, Phil was aware of the juxtaposition between them, her orderliness against his disarray. He needed to step away from the life that was crumbling around him, and for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, he felt compelled to extend an offer to Anna. "Anna," he began, his voice more gruff than he intended, "would you consider joining me on a trip somewhere warm?" The words hung in the air, awkward and unexpected. Anna's reaction was immediate, her eyes widening in surprise. Phil had always maintained a professional boundary, and this sudden proposition breached that safe distance, leaving her visibly unsettled. Phil, noticing her hesitation and perhaps realizing how inappropriate this invitation must have seemed, tried to salvage the situation. "I'm serious. I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it. Don't worry, you're safe with me. It's just an offer. I'll wait outside." Rebecca, who had quietly observed the exchange from a distance, sensed Anna's inner turmoil. With a few strides, she closed the gap between them, her presence both grounding and comforting. She offered a supportive smile, a gentle nudge of encouragement. "He's a good man, troubled, but good," Rebecca assured Anna in a soft undertone. "And he needs someone to look after him more than you might think." Anna's eyes, filled with uncertainty, met Rebecca's. There was an unspoken communication, a womanly solidarity that needed no words. "But I'm not sure," Anna began, her voice trailing off. Rebecca gently cut her off, her words both firm and kind. "You don't always get offers like this, and it's not just about the trip. It's about trust. Maybe it's about healing, too. You've earned a break, and he needs support. It's your choice, but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be just what we need." Anna took a deep breath, considering the layers of meaning in Rebecca's words. Trust, healing, support. She glanced towards the door where Phil said he would be waiting, a myriad of thoughts racing through her mind. With a resolve that surprised even herself, Anna made her choice. She nodded to Rebecca, a silent thank you for the push, and with a newfound determination, she walked towards the door, towards Phil, and towards whatever lay beyond. As Rebecca stood in the midst of the restaurant, the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a mantle she'd never worn before. Her experience was limited. She had been the assistant to a chef, yes, but managing an entire restaurant was a different beast altogether. Her past shadowed her. The time in prison had changed her, taught her resilience, but it had also kept her away from the pulse of the free world, especially the fast-paced life of the restaurant business. The staff murmured among themselves, casting sidelong glances filled with skepticism. They saw her as just a janitor, a dishwasher, hardly a managerial figure. But Rebecca drew in a deep, steadying breath, reminding herself of Phil's words, "I trust you." That trust, undeserved as it felt, was now the cornerstone of her newfound position. Her first step was to acquaint herself with every detail, every routine, and every person on staff. She would not command, she would listen, learn, and then lead. She spent her early mornings shadowing the chefs, her afternoons with the waitstaff, and her evenings balancing the books, familiarizing herself with the ebb and flow of the business. Rebecca's gaze swept across the interior of the restaurant. The decor, once charming, now seemed dated, wary under the pressure of competition from newer, flashier establishments encroaching on their territory. She realized that if they were to survive, to lure the clientele back, a change was not just warranted, it was imperative. She mulled over the budget, knowing full well the constraints she faced. It would require creativity, shrewd negotiations with suppliers, and perhaps a few small aesthetic touches that could make a significant difference. As Phil and Anna ambled through the vibrant cityscape, their initial reticence gradually gave way to a lighter rapport. Anna's joy was evident as she captured the essence of the city through her camera lens, each snapshot accompanied by her irrepressible cheerfulness. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Phil found himself being coaxed out of his melancholic shell, agreeing to explore and partake in various tours at her behest. The day's end found him seated at a quaint restaurant overlooking the water. The ambience, with the rhythmic lapping of waves against the pier and the sun casting glimmers over the water, was tranquil. Phil, in a light-hearted jest, acknowledged the pleasure of Anna's company. "I guess it was a good decision to bring you along after all," he said with a hint of tease in his voice. Anna's reply came with heartfelt sincerity. "Thanks, Phil. I'm truly enjoying myself." Her words sparked a candid admission from him. Her enthusiasm had indeed brushed off on him, a much-needed reprieve from his recent troubles. As they settled into a comfortable silence, Phil found himself contemplating Anna's contented nature. For 2 years, she had been a constant presence, her unwavering temperament a stark contrast to his own fluctuating moods. Voicing his observation, he complimented her. "You're so pretty, Anna. I actually never paid much attention before." Her smile in response was like a ray of warmth. "Thank you, Phil. You're very kind." However, the serenity was shattered by Anna's probing question. "Phil, why did you bring me here?" The question caught him off guard, stirring a tumult of emotions within him. He pondered his response, eventually choosing to reveal the series of events that had led to this moment, the chaos of his divorce laid bare. He also admitted that she acted like a force for good in his life, making him a better person. Anna's reaction was one of empathy and surprise, especially learning that Phil and his wife's separation wasn't marred by infidelity, but rather the destructive wedge of addiction. She voiced an insight that caught Phil off guard, suggesting that the unresolved love between him and his wife Gina was a beacon of hope rather than a closed chapter. Her observation that Gina had left not out of spite but out of exhaustion from his drinking struck a chord. When Phil mentioned the mysterious anonymous text, Anna frowned, as though she were trying to piece things together. Phil noticed her slight hesitation and asked, "What are you thinking?" Pulled from her thoughts, Anna replied, "What? Oh, nothing. I was just thinking." Phil shrugged and didn't probe any further. That last conversation would lead to some crucial revelations upon their return. Phil and Anna returned to their hotel. Through an oversight, Phil had only made a reservation for a single room for them both. He hadn't intended to suggest shared accommodations. It was a detail that had simply escaped him in the midst of his preoccupied thoughts. Upon realizing the potential for misunderstanding, Phil felt a wave of discomfort. Eager to ensure that Anna didn't misinterpret his intentions, he promptly went to the hotel's front desk and secured a separate room for her, wanting to preserve both professionalism and respect. Anna's reaction was a mix of relief and gratitude. She approached Phil with a smile that conveyed understanding and appreciation, and then gave him a friendly hug. "I appreciate it, Phil. I knew you weren't that type of guy. Thank you." The moment was significant for Phil, affirming the mutual respect that had quietly developed between them. "No, Anna. It's I who should thank you. Your perspective has given me the clarity I've been lacking for quite some time," he replied, with a renewed sense of gratitude for the empathetic and considerate woman before him. At the restaurant, whispers had begun to swirl, fueled by speculation and envy. The murmurs coalesced around the idea that Phil and Anna were entangled in a romantic affair. Susan, another waitress at the establishment, found herself at the epicenter of this gossip. Her envy simmered beneath a veneer of calm professionalism. She had harbored a clandestine desire for Phil's attention and was seething with resentment that Anna had been chosen to accompany him instead. Despite her inner turmoil, Susan was adept at keeping her emotions under wraps, her outward demeanor never betraying the jealousy that gnawed at her. Yet, in a surreptitious move driven by spite, she had penned an anonymous letter to Phil's wife. planting seeds of doubt and hoping to sabotage any remnants of trust in their strained relationship. Phil and Anna returned from their vacation. Even from a distance, they noticed a change at the restaurant. The old neon sign had been replaced by a handcrafted wooden one that lent a cozy and inviting atmosphere to the entrance. Stepping inside, they were greeted by a scene of bustling activity, with staff deftly navigating between tables laden with dishes. Rebecca was a nexus of calm efficiency, managing the flow of orders alongside the chef behind the counter. The interior transformation was striking. The harsh lighting had given way to a warm glow. The outdated plastic curtains had been swapped out for vibrant fabric ones. Phil turned to Anna, a silent question in his gaze. "What do you think?" he asked. "I like it," she replied, a smile touching her lips. "Feels like home." Approaching Rebecca, Phil saw the pride shining in her eyes. "I hope you don't mind the changes," she said. "But I thought the place needed a touch of warmth, something to make it feel more welcoming. It seems to resonate with the customers." Phil maintained a professional composure, but internally, he was elated. His restaurant had been revitalized, infused with new energy and warmth, and it was clear that Rebecca's personal touch had made all the difference. On a serene Sunday evening, the restaurant was closed to the public as the staff prepared for a private celebration. With the tables beautifully arranged and the aroma of sumptuous meals wafting through the air, Rebecca took to the stage to address the gathering. "Everyone, we're gathered here tonight to mark a fresh start and to," she began, her voice rich with emotion, but before she could continue, Susan stepped forward, her intention to disrupt the speech clear. "I think it's only appropriate that we include someone very special in our celebration," Susan announced, her voice laced with a subtle undercurrent of triumph. She paused for effect. "Please welcome Gina." The chatter in the room dwindled into a stunned silence as Gina made her entrance. Susan's expression, ripe with anticipation of shock and disarray, faltered against the warm, knowing smiles of Rebecca and Anna. Rebecca's smile broadened as Gina stepped forward, not as a presumed adversary, but as an esteemed guest. Susan stepped closer, her voice a soothing melody of diplomacy. "Gina, I believe it's time you met Anna, Phil's close friend. They've recently enjoyed a trip together." What Susan hadn't accounted for was the web of understanding that had been spun between Gina, Phil, and the others. The details of the trip and the party's true intent had been confided to Gina, whose gratitude towards Rebecca and Anna for their support of Phil was evident in her gentle, relieved demeanor. "Thank you, Susan," Gina replied, her tone gracious yet layered with an unveiled irony. Her eyes met Phil's, and she approached him with open arms. "For helping me understand my husband better." As she embraced Phil, she whispered, "I'm sorry, honey. I'm glad you're back." Phil's eyes shimmered with tears, a silent testament to the evening's unexpected turn. Rebecca and Anna, the orchestrators of truth, stood beside them, their faces alight with satisfaction. Susan, on the other hand, was the picture of bewilderment. The backstory unraveled later that evening. Anna, ever wary of Susan and her machinations, had decided to act when Phil mentioned an ambiguous text from Susan. With a blend of courage and curiosity, Anna reached out to Gina, expecting hostility but hoping for understanding. Gina, equally shocked to be approached by her husband's supposed mistress, opened up about her suspicions of Susan. Anna, connecting the dots, shared her own doubts about Susan's intentions. In that pivotal moment, the room was a sanctuary of solidarity and mending spirits, all deftly woven together by individuals who held the well-being of both the restaurant and Phil's family as paramount. A pure heart ultimately prevails. Throughout his ordeals, Phil had clung to his humanity, reaching out to Rebecca in her hour of need. His benevolence wasn't in vain. She returned the favor with passion, injecting vitality and hope back into his beloved establishment. Phil raised his glass in a toast, his gaze settling on each face in turn. "And let's not forget Anna," he said, his voice laced with warmth and gratitude. "You've been the sister I chose, pulling me from the depth of despair and reminding me that at the end of the day, Family, both by blood and by bond, is what carries us through. Gina, standing beside Phil, offered a small, introspective smile. Initially wrathful towards her wandering husband, she had never let go of the belief that he would return to her. Despite the anger, she had waited, her heart knowing before her mind accepted that Phil was and would always be hers. It was Rebecca and Anna, united by their unwavering commitment, who took the reins of the restaurant. Their hands joined over the table, a silent oath to continue thriving, not just as custodians of a restaurant, but as family.